Hello, this is Carrie McLaughlin from the South Atlantic Council. I'm staff and I'm going to review the public hearing summary for Spiny Lobster Regulatory Amendment 4. A little overview of the federal fisheries regulatory process starting down here at the bottom. There's input and advice from the council staff, from our stock assessments, the Scientific and Statistical Committee, and our advisory panels and public comment. This goes to the councils. They gather input from scientists and fishing stakeholders and develop fishery management plans and amendments to those plans. For the Spiny Lobster, this is a joint fishery management plan between the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council and the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council. The management plans and the amendments are approved by the councils and then submitted to the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Secretary of Commerce. They review those amendments and then they implement them as federal fishing regulations. Spiny Lobster Regulatory Amendment 4 has a couple of actions in it, so here's a little background on it. The management benchmarks and catch limits for Spiny Lobster were implemented in 2012 through Spiny Lobster Amendment 10, and this set the maximum sustainable yield at a proxy equal to the overfishing level at 7.9 million pounds. The overfishing threshold, which is the maximum fishing mortality threshold, also at 7.9 million pounds. Amendment 10 also put in place the overfish threshold, which is the minimum stock size threshold. And then we have our overfishing level. The acceptable biological catch, the ABC, was 7.32 million pounds, and the council set that the annual catch limit, the ACL, equal to that ABC value. And then the councils also set an annual catch target, the ACT, equal to 90% of the ACL at 6.59 million pounds. And the OFL and ABC were calculated using the time period of 2001 through the 2009-2010 time period, and those were the most recent 10 years at the time, and they were recommended by the Gulf Scientific and Statistical Committee. Spiny lobster landings exceeded that annual catch target in the 2013-14 season, 2014-15 season, and the 2015-16 season. And so the accountability measure for spiny lobster is that if landings exceed that annual catch target, the ACT, then the councils will convene a spiny lobster review panel who will review landings and make a determination if corrective action is needed. So the review panel was convened in 2015, and they did not make any recommendations to change any management or the OFL and the ABC. The 2016 review panel, though, did recommend updating the overfishing level, the OFL, and the ABC using a time period of 1991-92 through 2015-16. So that in that way it would capture the dynamics of the fishery and how the landings go up and down. The Gulf and the South Atlantic Scientific and Statistical Committees, the SSCs, also recommended the same time period, and then also the Spiny Lobster Advisory Panels for both councils supported using this time period, and they also recommended convening a review panel when landings are below 5.3 million pounds. So we have in this table the current levels and then the levels proposed in this amendment. So this would increase the OFL to 10.46 million pounds, the ABC and ACL to 9.6 million pounds, and then the ACT to 8.64 million pounds. There's also an action to look at recreational trap prohibition. So right now recreational spiny lobster traps are prohibited for Florida, but there was some interest in using traps for recreational harvest of spiny lobster in North Carolina. So the councils were discussing that. The level of harvest using traps in the EEZ off Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina is probably pretty small, but we're not, it's unknown. And there was some concern about habitat impacts from traps, protected species interaction, and in the EEZ off the other states in the South Atlantic besides Florida. So the councils are proposing to extend that prohibition into the EEZ, into federal waters off Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. So here's the expected timeline for Regulatory Amendment 4. The Gulf Council reviewed the draft actions and alternatives at their meeting in February 2017. And then in March 2017, the South Atlantic Council reviewed the draft actions and alternatives also. And then they approved it for a public hearing webinar. In May 2017 is when we have our webinar public hearing. The South Atlantic is conducting that. And then in June, the South Atlantic and Gulf Councils will review any public input that came in, select preferred alternatives or change the preferred alternatives they've already selected, and then they will approve this for formal review by the Secretary of Commerce. And so we're expecting the changes to be implemented in late 2017. There are two actions in Regulatory Amendment 4. Action 1 is separated into two sub-actions. So Action 1 modifies the current definitions of the management benchmarks. And we have Action 1-1, which would update the maximum sustainable yield, the MSY, and the overfishing threshold. And then Action 1-2, which would modify the annual catch limit and the annual catch target for spiny lobster. And then we have Action 2, which will prohibit the use of traps for recreational harvest of spiny lobster in the South Atlantic EEZ. So Action 1 and Action 1-1, we just have two alternatives in here. The first is the no action, so it would keep it at the current MSY proxy and overfishing threshold at 7.9 million pounds. And then the councils have selected a preferred alternative, an alternative 2, which would update these to 10.46 million pounds using that longer time period recommended by the SSCs. Action 1-2, we have the no action alternative, which would keep the annual catch limit and the annual catch target at the current levels. And then preferred alternative 2, which would update the annual catch limit and the annual catch target based on the SSC's recommendation to use the longer time period. This graphic shows the landings, which is the black line, the total landings of spiny lobster in millions of pounds over the last, since 1991-92. The blue line is the current annual catch limit and the red line is the current annual catch target. And then the dashed lines are the proposed annual catch limit, and then the green line is the proposed annual catch target. Action 2, to prohibit the use of traps for recreational harvest of spiny lobster in the South Atlantic EEZ. Alternative 1 is no action. Traps are prohibited gear for recreational harvest for Florida, but they're not prohibited in other parts of the South Atlantic. But all traps must comply with the requirements for vessel and gear identification, trap construction, and harvest limits. Preferred alternative 2 would be to prohibit the use of traps for recreational harvest of spiny lobster in the South Atlantic EEZ. And there are expected biological benefits by reducing the likelihood of protected species interactions or habitat damage from any traps. And the economic and social effects are expected to be minimal or none because traps are probably not a popular gear type for recreational harvests in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. So what can the public do? You can attend one of the council meetings or participate in the webinar. The webinar is May 9th, starting at 6 p.m. We'll start with a Q&A with council staff, and then we'll move into the public comment session. And that's when your comments will be recorded, and these will be included in the public record and then also made available to both councils. And then we have the Gulf Council meeting and the South Atlantic Council meeting in June. And you can take a look at the council's websites to get that information on the webinar and on the council meetings. You can also submit comments on via the online form, and we're using the Gulf Council's online form, so all the comments will go to one place, and you can also go there and view the comments that have been submitted. And you can also mail comments to us, to our office here. We have the address and information there. The deadline for comments to be included in the comment overview for the briefing book is May 19th. However, any comments that come in will be provided to the council and made available for the public to see. If you need more information or want to get involved in the process, if you have specific questions about spiny lobster, you can contact me, Carrie McLaughlin. If you have general questions about the council, you can contact our fishery outreach specialist, Cameron Rhodes, or our public information officer, Kim Iverson. And we also have our website, Facebook, and Twitter information there. Thank you.